Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is August 4th. On this day in 1892, a gruesome double murder shocked the nation and gave rise to one of the most infamous and mysterious cases in American true crime history. On August 4th, Andrew and Abby Borden were found brutally murdered in their home in Fall River, Massachusetts. At the center of it all was their daughter, Lizzie Borden, a woman whose name still echoes in rhyme and rumor more than a century later. Today, we're discussing the event known as the Lizzie Borden axe murders. Let's get started. August 4th, 1892 dawned like any other day on 2nd Street in Fall River, but inside the Borden home, something unspeakable was brewing. Earlier that morning, the family's doctor, Dr. Bowen, stopped by. Abby Borden had complained of feeling unwell, and she feared that she had been poisoned. But the doctor found nothing out of the ordinary and went on his way. Outside, Bridget Maggie Sullivan, the family's maid, was dutifully washing the windows and trying to endure the oppressive heat. Inside, Lizzie Borden was said to be puttering around the house. At some point between 9 and 10 a.m., Abby headed upstairs to tidy up the guest bedroom, but she never came back down. Andrew Borden returned from his morning walk a little after 10:30. Bridget struggled with the jammed front door, and Lizzie allegedly greeted her father as he settled onto the sitting room couch. Moments later, Andrew was attacked. He was struck with 10 or 11 hatchet blows. One clean cut sliced his eye in two. Abby, as it turns out, had already been dead for over an hour. She'd been struck 19 times in the guest room, and her body was left face down beside the bed. Investigators believe that she was attacked from behind, with the first blow knocking her down, followed by repeated strikes. Lizzie called out to Bridget just before 11 a.m., quote, "Maggie, come quick. Father's dead. Somebody has killed him," end quote. When Bridget rushed in, she found a horrifying scene. Andrew was sprawled on the couch, his face mutilated. The alarm spread fast. Dr. Bowen returned, this time to find 2 bodies. The police followed quickly. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, whispering in horror. What had happened in the Borden home that morning? And who could have committed such a brutal act? In the hours that followed, suspicion turned inward. Lizzie, 32 years old and unmarried, lived at the home with her father and stepmother. She claimed to have been in the barn looking for sinkers for a fishing trip during the attack, but her story shifted repeatedly. At different times, she said she'd been in the kitchen, the parlor, or upstairs. Meanwhile, Bridget Sullivan said that she'd been outside, then upstairs resting. She hadn't heard anything unusual except perhaps a laugh that she thought had come from the top of the stairs. But if Lizzie had been in the barn, who laughed? And why did no one hear the screams or the struggle? The inconsistencies were piling up. Lizzie's behavior drew scrutiny. She was oddly calm. A few days later, she burned a dress on the kitchen stove, saying that it had paint on it. Rumors also spread that she had tried to buy prussic acid, deadly poison, just days before the murders, supposedly to clean a fur cape. A pharmacist turned her away. At her inquest on August 8th, Lizzie appeared confused and evasive. Some blamed the morphine prescribed by her doctor to calm her nerves. Her contradictory answers, though, only continued to fuel suspicions. Finally, on August 11th, she was arrested. Newspapers erupted with headlines. This was a huge story. She was the genteel daughter of a wealthy family who was accused of hacking her parents to death. It was a story that the public couldn't resist. And the investigation inside the Borden home just turned up more questions than answers. In the cellar, police found several axes and hatchets. One had a freshly broken handle and ash on the blade, as though someone had tried to make it look untouched. It was suspected to be the murder weapon, but it bore no blood, and no clothing stained with blood was ever recovered. However, a bucket of cloths with reddish stains was discovered in the basement, but Lizzie said she was menstruating and investigators didn't pursue the matter further. Even today, many wonder why those cloths weren't tested in some way. But perhaps the most suspicious thing was that burned dress. Lizzie had burned it in the kitchen after saying that it had been ruined when she had brushed against wet paint. But who knows? At trial, prosecutors relied heavily on motive. Lizzie and her sister Emma stood to inherit the bulk of their father's wealth, and Lizzie's relationship with her stepmother was strained. But even with that potential motive, the prosecution had no smoking gun. They just had a cloud of inconsistencies, unusual behavior, and suspicion. In June 1893, the nation turned its eyes to New Bedford, where Lizzie Borden stood trial for murder. The courtroom was packed with spectators and reporters eager to glimpse the woman who was accused of such a heinous crime. The prosecution, led by Hosea Knowlton and William Moody, outlined Lizzie's erratic statements, the dress burning, and her attempted purchase of poison. They admitted that they had no eyewitnesses and no murder weapon, but argued that circumstantial evidence pointed straight to Lizzie. The defense, led by George Robinson and Andrew Jennings, countered with a portrait of Lizzie as a devout churchgoer with impeccable character. They argued that there was no direct evidence tying her to the crime and that it was unthinkable that a woman of her stature and refinement could commit such a savage act. Perhaps most crucially, Lizzie's inquest testimony, which was full of contradictions, was excluded. She hadn't had legal representation at the time, and the judge ruled it inadmissible. In his final instructions, Judge Justin Dewey told the jury that suspicion was not enough. So, after just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned. Not guilty. Lizzie smiled as the verdict was read. Quote, "I am the happiest woman in the world," she reportedly said. But though she walked free, she would never escape the court of public opinion. Lizzie Borden returned to Fall River, but she was never welcomed home. She and Emma moved to a new house they named Maplecroft, but the townspeople kept their distance. Over time, Emma distanced herself too, and the sisters became estranged. Lizzie lived out her days quietly, dying from pneumonia in 1927 at the age of 66. Emma followed just a few days later. Still, the public fascination never died. The nursery rhyme, Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks, etched her name into American folklore. But it wasn't factual. Abby was her stepmother and she only had 19 blows. Andrew had 10, but it captured the public's imagination. Today, the Borden house is a museum and a bed and breakfast. Visitors can sleep in the very rooms where the murder took place. The Fall River Historical Society holds artifacts from the case, including trial documents and Lizzie's personal effects. Writers, filmmakers, and historians continue to debate her guilt. In 1997, even U.S. Supreme Court Justices Rehnquist and O'Connor participated in a mock trial. Their verdict? Also not guilty, but not without lingering doubts. The Borden case remains a cultural mirror, reflecting the fears, biases, and mysteries of each era that revisits it. It's part courtroom drama, part gothic horror, and entirely American. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do